Hello and welcome to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities space. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer: nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's episode is sponsored by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And today's guest is the founder of Wealth Research Group, where he discusses investment principles, stocks, gold, and passive income. Lior Gantz, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be back.
Yeah, happy to have you back. Always enjoy our conversations. I wanted to start with touching on an interview I did last week with Martin Armstrong. And he said he thinks that the American empire and much of the West is experiencing a decline similar to the fall of Rome. He's done extensive research on it. And that's the conclusion he's come to. I'm wondering if you agree with that. I know last time I had you on, you were pretty bullish when it came to U.S. companies. So I'm wondering what if your opinion has changed at all, and how you see this whole East versus West story playing out in the long run.
I think that the West or Western civilization is certainly on the decline. But the question is, what do you define as Western civilization? Do you include economics in it? Do you include influence, politics, etc.? I think that what happened in the West is that the West won in 1990 when the Soviet Union failed. The West won, and I think that the sin of the West is that they weren't prepared for how victory looks like. And in the last 30 years, instead of maintaining that spot at the top, the generation that gave us this supremacy, the generation of the World War II veterans, and then the generation that elevated the United States and Europe and Japan and brought them back to the forefront of the world. They did not pass it on. And if you just look at the youth of the United States right now, it's disgusting. And I think that it's even worse in Europe. Europe is really a dying culture. Funny that with the comparisons to Rome, one of the main reasons, and Rome and the United States are starkly different superpowers. Rome is a true classical empire where it expanded, it conquered, remained with a massive army and ruled over other countries, whereas the United States is an empire of alliances. They have military bases, 800 military bases around the world, but they don't rule over other sovereign countries. They do influence them. They do shady things and whatever else, but they don't directly interfere in other sovereign countries. They have international bodies that wield influence. So it's not like they're an isolationist, obviously not, but very different empires. I think that if you look at some of the driving forces for the fall of Rome, one of them was the low birth rate. That's a great sign of a declining empire. And in Europe right now, these populations are simply they're dying. Most European families have a one child and a pet, and that's just not enough for the replacement that you need for the tax bracket. But these are all symptoms. The causes that these cultures are suffering a massive identity crisis, and I think that they're peaking in their crisis. In other words, we're hitting the bottom for many of these cultures. You're seeing a lot of signs of that, and the question is, when you hit those bottoms, what is the reaction from these cultures? Are they going to weaken and die, or are they going to come back and surge? And that's where my my main thought, my thought, my central thought is that the United States is definitely in a place where they can weather the storm of progressiveness, postmodernism, and wokeness that have plagued their societies and infiltrated their most sacred places of power, like the White House. It started with Obama, which is a pure postmodernist, um, progressive, woke president who his mistakes have cost the lives of tens of millions around the world, directly and indirectly. He has created so many troubles, and to a very large extent, if you look at the key people in his administration, Blinken and Sullivan, they're now the key people at Biden's White House. So if you look at the decline, there is certainly a massive decline, just a massive decline. Most American young people just do not know history. They do not know their country. They don't understand that waking up in the morning, going to a coffee shop, going to the beach, going to work, having this life with no threats, with no one pointing missiles at you like in the Cold War era. This is not a given. This is not the normal world. All other countries face threats this way or the other, but they will face the threats. They will face the reality of their mistakes. But I think that it's always the United States that can turn things around. That is the ultimate country, and that is why I'm saying when they are good, things are good. When they are bad, things are really bad.
And I want to continue along this theme and get your thoughts on the US dollar. Specifically, we've seen some big news which supports the trend of de-dollarization, and that is the Saudis officially ending the petrodollar, which was an agreement to sell oil only in US dollars. Now they're free to trade oil in whatever currencies they've liked. They've already done a little bit of that. What does this mean for the US dollar? Do you think gold could ultimately be involved in some way in these transactions moving forward? And what message are the Saudis sending to the world with this move?
First of all, the Saudis are their heir to the throne, Mohammed bin Salman, is a very moderate person and a very modern person as well. So not only moderate but modern, and I think that the last thing he wants is to rattle the boat and shake things up. So even though the petrodollar announcement on June 9th was an important one, he's not trying to create a front against the United States or anything like that. His vision is much grander, and his trophy asset is so important to the world that he has a lot of leverage over other leaders. And I'm talking about the sacred places for the Islam. Those are supremely important in bringing in tranquility, peace, and just advancement to the region, to the Middle East, a region that for thousands of years has been bloody and barbaric. So I think that when you look at his actions and when you look at where Saudi Arabia wants to position itself as a country, it wants to position itself as one of the most important countries in the world. And to do that, they are not going to create problems for the United States. Does he and Obama and Biden and this line of Democrats, do they see eye to eye? They really don't. MBS and his father, they despise progressiveness, and they actually adored Jared Kushner. One of the reasons that they adored Jared Kushner is because when he came in to speak with them, the people in Saudi Arabia told Jared, "We've never seen anyone like you. Most administrations, they send us four types of people. They send us those that lecture us and tell us how we should behave. Those are the progressives. Those are any people that Clinton would have sent them, Obama, or now Blinken, who I don't know if they even give him a hotel room when he gets there. Um, the second type of people is people that just don't have any authority to do anything. They're just, it's even more of a disrespect, but they just send somebody just to fill the seat. The third person is just disengaged. He even says that some American people they fall asleep in meetings. We've seen Biden fall asleep just recently in a when Andrea Bocelli. It's a good thing he's blind. He was singing one of Puccini's most important arias, Nessun Dorma. The Italian prime minister, she's like having an ecstasy moment, and he's falling asleep right beside her. That's so disrespectful. And the fourth person is a person like George Bush would have sent. It's just a warmonger. Um, and Jared Kushner spent the first year just listening to these tribes, because they're all tribes. They're tribal people. And at the end of that first year, he had no results. And but in all the internal conversations, everybody told him, "You will bring peace to the Middle East," and that's how the Abraham Accords came to be. It's because he understood what they want, and then he did what conservatives and libertarians do, which is to look at the United States and understand that the assets of the United States are so big that they don't need to use their army to create win-wins. They can use their assets. This approach is obviously the Trump approach, the businessman approach. Let me pick up the phone and understand the other side. And it's because he's not a career politician. He doesn't think that he has a right to send troops and move people around like puppets, like career politicians do. And if you, I know you're a libertarian, so you would kind of feel what I'm trying to say here. When the founding fathers talked about America and how it should be, they were all business people that served their country for 4 years and then went back to their plantations or wherever they were living their lives. They were essentially sacrificing their business for 4 years, running the country, and then back. We didn't have a politician as a career where he's so detached from the people. He doesn't know what's going on because he's not living in the real world. And if you look at like the careers of Blinken, for example, he's a Harvard grad, a Columbia grad, and then a journalist. He's never had any real qualifications. That's why he's in charge of the greatest ever military disaster in American history, the pullback from Afghanistan. So when you look at and now going back to your question about the petrodollar, I think that look, you and I, we live in countries that are not the reserve currency. All countries are not the reserve currency except the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency started in Bretton Woods because America was the clear and only superpower in the Western Hemisphere after World War II. Their navy had the power to really secure the open seas and wield this idea of the Marshall Plan and IMF and the UN, etc. These were all post World War II organizations that are now no longer even the Americans don't like them. So I think that what's happening is a de-dollarization, which the Americans don't really feel bad about. The U.S. dollar will continue to de-dollarize as a reserve currency, and it will be fine. England has the reserve currency before it; they're okay. The Dutch had it, the Portuguese. This is not the deciding factor in how your country will be. Look at Singapore, the most successful story of the 20th and 21st century. Their currency, you can't even name it. So I don't think that's the issue. I think that we are moving into a world of that the dollar will not be the sole reserve currency. You will have other baskets, and countries will choose for political reasons and strategic reasons not to be involved in the U.S. dollar as much because 40 countries are already sanctioned. There are countries that are outside of the SWIFT system. The weaponization of the dollar is very commonplace these days, and I think that's your ultimate answer. Both the United States and other countries understand we are past the time for the U.S. to be the reserve currency, and It's just going to de facto weapon. The day after, when you talk about gold, gold is certainly getting a legitimate place in the post U.S. dollar world because it's non-political, it's not controlled by entities, and it's very difficult to manipulate it. Um, and so that's one thing that's working to its advantage, and I believe that you see it in the price. It's over 2,300. It's trading near all-time highs, and I think that trend will continue. We'll have an official role, like in the 35-1 Bretton Woods era or in the classical gold standard era. I don't think so.
And what about when it comes to these oil transactions? Because specifically for the renminbi, there's been talk of that when that's involved in trade, one of the most efficient uses of that for whatever country's involved in the transaction is to turn around and use that renminbi to buy gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Do you see that occurring when it comes to potential maybe oil deals between the Saudis and the Chinese?
I think in general the big problem with the yuan or the renminbi is that we don't really know what it's worth. It's essentially pegged to the U.S. dollar. It's not a free floating currency. So up until the time where we would see it as a China is playing the game of a developing country. It's been playing that game since Clinton bought that game, and that has kind of played itself out in American politics. That's how they've been appeasing to them. They stole their IP. That's okay. They spy on Americans. They have the Confucius Institute around the United States. There's so many things that they do. And Trump was the only one that was like, okay, let's stop this nonsense. You want to talk eye to eye? Fine. Let's do that. He brought Xi over. Trump's grandson speaks Mandarin and impressed the Chinese. They a lot of time in the media, because it's fake news. It looks like Trump is kissing up to Putin or to Xi, and it's so detached from reality. It's exactly the opposite of what's happening. He's building real relationships, real trust, respect with these countries, and a way forward. And anyways, my point was to say that I think it's best for the West if they understand that buying friends and just inventing reality, which is what progressive people do, all you're going to do is bring more terror, more wars, and more problems to you until you'll understand that, and then you'll search for your knight in shining armor. But you can stop all that because you are, or the Americans are, the most important, the greatest in terms of their assets, in terms of what they can offer the world. They are just simply unmatched, and it just depends on them where the world goes from here. If they elect Biden for 4 more years, I think we're going to World War III. And if they elect Trump, I think we are going into a very incredible era, because we are building this massive tension, and there is a path out of it, and he can bring it. And I don't say that blindly. I tell you this after hundreds of hours of understanding the two choices that we have, and also understanding the 2024 Trump is very different than 2016 Trump.
Very interesting breakdown there. I want to move over to the commodities markets and discuss tin specifically. This is a commodity that is not often discussed. And you noted recently that it was the best performing base metal in the first quarter of the year. Walk us through the investment thesis for tin. Why was it the best performing metal? Base metal, I should say.
First of all, thank you for reading our newsletter. I think that the tin, first of all, tin doesn't have an ETF. So that's a very important part. If you want to play or if you want exposure to tin, you have to actually own shares of a tin company. And there are very few pure play tin companies. Tin is super important for soldiering, which is uh, critical for AI. It's critical for anything that has to do with the electrification, and we're going to electrify and the energy demands we need in the next 20 years. They're they're almost exponential. Um, if do you remember the day after Trump got convicted in New York, he went to a fundraiser in Silicon Valley and raised like 20 million, I think, or 12 million in one day. And one of the most important topics that he understood there was how much AI needs more electrification. And what I love about him is that he actually can think of a plan while at the fundraiser, and that's one of the reasons why the tech entrepreneurs that were there, usually leaning left, actually wrote those big checks. So I think that tin is going to be very important. The main problem with tin and with many other commodities is that for 30 years, commodities looked to the West as a low value add, and therefore they allowed second world and third world countries to enjoy massive multi-billion-dollar investments in their native countries, and the Americans and the Europeans just bought them. Yeah, the classic example is Germany with Russian oil and natural gas, of course, but we can see it in the United States, which has basically no lithium mining, no uranium mining, uh, hardly any tin mining, etc. But then when you look at where they are actually mined, so tin is mined either in Peru, which is actually a volatile area right now. There's a lot of moving pieces in South America. In Indonesia, which Indonesia is becoming almost like a mini China. It's losing its sovereignty, and the United States will not be able to work with Indonesia very easily. I don't know if you know this, but if you buy metals from Indonesia, you actually have to pay an extra tax. For example, Tesla has to pay an extra tax if they have to buy their metals from Indonesia, and that obviously rolls over to the consumer. And then another area where you produce tin is in the Congo. The Congo right now is a hotbed for ISIS, Al Qaeda. The French and the Russians are basically fighting a direct war in the Sahel. So all of these areas depend on these very tranquil times that we've had, where the open seas had no piracy, there were no Houthis, and the Houthis are just going to inspire other groups. Of course, this is just the beginning, and it's over. So where are you going to get your tin from? And tin is in massive demand, and that's one reason why you saw it doing so well in Q1. And I think that you will see commodities in general doing well. It's not well for the average person, but it's well for anyone with exposure or a hedge in commodities. But don't be glad if commodities go up. It means that the other 85% of your net worth is not going to do so well.
Right. Well, you mentioned uranium there. Give us your current thoughts on the uranium sector. Obviously, we saw quite a run up in the spot price to above $100. It's pulled back since. The equities have actually pulled back recently. Could this be a good entry point? Do you think there's a ways to go in this uranium bull market?
In the first bull market for uranium, the price went up in the 1970s. If I'm not mistaken, it went up around the 30 or 40 times. Then you had the bear market that went all the way to the 2000s, and then the second bull market, it went from $7 a pound to 140 a pound. It then collapsed to $16 a pound. When Trump got elected, it actually bottomed, coincidentally or not. And since the time, it went up from 16 to just over 100, so 7 times. So if you look at the past bull markets, we're nowhere near either 20 times our money from bottom to top, or in the 1970s. I have to go back and look, but I think it was either 20 or 40 times. It was definitely a staggering amount. The second part is that we just had, just 10 years ago, one of the worst disasters for uranium. So the safety of the industry, the quality, the standards are much, much, much better. And then the applications are now getting transformative. SMRs, which are small modular reactors, are going to pop up everywhere. Those are reactors that are not like the ones we've built in the southern United States, where they're double the time that the contractor said and double the budget. That's insane, and it's stupid. And the way you get around it is by building, and with the amount of electricity we need to build small modular reactors that will sit outside of communities. They're clean, they're safe, they're going to be beautiful looking, advanced tech, very slick, and they're going to power our communities. They're going to power our AI centers. They're going to power our data centers. I think that uranium has a lot of years of a bull market ahead of it. It's a transformation. It's in a transformational period.
And what about silver? Obviously, gold's been making headlines. Silver stackers quite frustrated with the metal. Nowhere near its either all-time highs in the 80s or even its 2011 highs as well. A lot of catalysts seem to be working in its favor. I've spoken to several people on the show who believe that silver is now purely an industrial metal and it's completely lost its monetary qualities. What are your thoughts there? And give us your just overall forecast for the silver space moving forward.
The facts remain that 50% of silver is industrial, about 30% is jewelry, and 20% is bullion. But if you look at the game changer, which is China and India, but mostly China for right now, I would say it's definitely a monetary metal. The Chinese, since the 80s, have been brainwashed to think that if you build a wall and you build another one and you build another one, it's a piggy bank. So they've all bought apartments, and the average Chinese person, if you uh, evenly disperse the amount of doors and units in China to every person, there's two apartments for every person. It's the most crazy real estate bubble in human history, and you can see it by the size of their real estate market. It's 25% of GDP. For comparison, at the subprime mortgage crisis, real estate was 8% of American GDP, and you saw what it did. So in China, the banks are less involved in these toxic loans than in the United States, so it doesn't have to end the same way. But for sure, if you look at the Chinese person who will not buy a Chinese stock in the stock market and had all of his wealth tied to real estate, and now that bubble is gone, where is he going to go? Thousands of years of history say he's going back to precious metals. And for most Chinese people, silver is way more attainable than gold. So I do think that when you look at the Chinese people and the fact that they've been mining real estate for 30 years instead of silver, that is one of the primary reasons why silver has underperformed gold by so much. And it could go back to a much more normal 50 or 40 or 30 to 1. And at 2,400, you're talking $80 silver. So to me, silver is extremely undervalued because around let's call it 1 billion, because who knows how many Chinese are really in the world. But yeah, you have a lot of purchasing power over there needing to buy silver. Industrially, for sure, silver has thousands of applications, but I think what drives the price of silver up is not the industrial uses, because the industrial uses actually push it down towards the mining price, which is around $15 or $16 globally. What drives it up is if it's used as an inflation hedge and as a premium, and that's why you want to pay more for it. So I think that even if it's 50 or 60 or 70, it's not going to change the price of an iPhone or the price of a solar panel. You're talking micro amounts, and so I don't think it's going to create a heck of a lot more miners, which will create a lot more supply. It's just too damn difficult to bring back production of silver mines around the world. It's mostly a byproduct. And if you look at the silver in general, I don't see it. It's much more likely that silver is going to 50 or 60 after 40 years of being below its all-time high than anything else.
And are there any other commodities that you're currently paying attention to that you think present an attractive value proposition? Obviously, copper's somewhat of a big story. A lot of people think there's going to be major copper shortages up ahead. Gehring and Rosenzweig, who put out some great research, think that natural gas is actually going to be the next uranium. It's like uranium was several years back. Um, uh, Agriculture is something a lot of people discuss. What are you watching currently that you think more investors should be paying attention to?
Well, the first thing is with commodities, the first thing you need to look at is what's extremely hated and cheap. Otherwise, you should not be in the commodities game, because if it's being discussed a lot, it's more mature. You should not touch the underlying commodity. You should look at superb companies, perhaps, in the sector that can benefit from the profitable prices and from the favorable environment. Because let's say uranium. Uranium is trading above its cost. The cost globally is around 70 or 75. So to build a mine is profitable, and therefore there's a lot of M&A. So if you have a great company, well run, which has a great either an active mine or a development mine that or development project, then you can do well. But if you're looking for a longer term play and to be early, you have to go where it's super cheap and hated. I agree that the natural gas is super cheap and hated. And then the last thing you want to look at is for that period of super cheap and hated to be coupled with some early signs of a turnaround. Because something that's super cheap and hated, believe me, that can last for 2-3 years. You will not stay that course. So super cheap, hated, and has some sort of a turnaround. A government regulation that's bringing it back, a country that's shifting focus to it, something that gives you a lot of indication that, hey, we're actually going to see a big turnaround here. So that's, to me, the three things you need to look at with commodities to start with. So yeah, that is a real important premise to where we're going. Also, keep in mind, the great commodity investors of all times, they've had around 10 to 15% of their portfolio tied directly to commodities. That's it. You can have ancillary exposure. You can have exposure that's like second layer or third layer. But for the most part, when you ask the great commodity investors how much they had tied up in commodities, it's 10 to 15%. It's not the majority of your wealth tied directly to commodities, because it's super volatile, hard to predict, and it's boom and bust. So for someone who's your age or my age, it's much more beneficial to look at companies that show you a 30-year run rate where they can grow their industries than to be involved in something that's much more intensive and could actually, in the end, yield inferior results.
Some great thoughts there. My portfolio is vast majority tied to commodities, so I'm not going to follow your advice, but I actually think there's some great insights there, and definitely something to think about. Now, I want to discuss Putin's announcement that there's going to be an alternate payment system that the BRICS nations are developing to get outside of sanctions. Uh, what are your thoughts there? How soon do you think this could be implemented? Do you think gold and commodities will be involved in any way? Obviously, there was rumors swirling, I think, last year about the BRICS were going to announce a gold-backed currency, and it never happened. Now it seems to be going in that direction. Where do you think this is all headed?
I think that if we go back to what I said about the United States is going to be the determining factor of this. The BRICS, um, when you look, so the BRICS is basically China, and China is not doing well at all. Russia is a country that in 20 years might not exist in the same format you see today. They're ethnic minorities inside of Russia. Just keep in mind, Russia is like eight. It's multiple time zones. It's so many ethnic groups, and the majority of them despise just despise the federal government in Moscow and want nothing to do with it. In the West, there's this veneer of this aura around President Putin. You saw it with Tucker Carlson, for example, but it's so misguided. It's just not based on any reality. Anyone who will detox from this brainwashing that Putin is just a genius, who's just a patriot, will understand that it's not that. It's not that at all. Now, is the West to blame for what happened? The West is not to blame. Biden is to blame for what happened between Russia and Ukraine. It's the easiest conflicts to avoid. But again, it's that conceit, that arrogance, that ideology that Blinken and Sullivan had, that they just don't believe in cause and effect. They just believe in chaos. They're like Soros and like Schwab. They believe that that they can test things, that everything is a lab experiment, and that they can always fix it because they're just that arrogant. And unfortunately, people die. A lot of people have died. But Russia, as a nation, does not have the kind of influence and power to create a currency. It's weak. Its culture is dying. Their population is decreasing. They don't produce anything. They're a very important commodity nation, but that's it. They just do not have the leverage and what's needed to wield influence. They have to resort to buying weapons from the greatest terrorist nation in the world, Iran, and in return they have to send mercenaries to Africa and to Syria and everywhere else. It's a organized chaos, and in the West you cannot understand it, because in the West all you see is a patriot type person trying to defend its borders against the CIA influence over the expansion of NATO. So no, I don't think that the BRICS are going to create a meaningful currency. They just do not trust each other. They have border problems. Like India and China have like a hot war over a border with thousands of kilometers that they are fighting, actively fighting. Brazil is a country that could collapse in the next 10 to 20 years because their entire fake economy is based on the globalization of commodities. But their commodities are super expensive, and these are all failed countries in general. They enjoyed the hyper globalization period of 1991 till 2020, and it's over. And like I said, the world will depend on who gets elected in the United States. We are either going to World War III. It's almost inevitable, or we are going to get Trump in office, and what he will try to do is save the situation. And if you do not really believe what I'm saying, if you do not really understand what I'm saying, I can tell you I am at ground zero. I am actually living this nightmare myself. So I can tell you exactly what's happening. All we have in Israel is we are experiencing this first, but you guys are going to experience it after us. It's coming to you. This is more normal than what we've had in the last 30 years. The last deglobalization period was between 1910 and 1950. Even back then, people thought, because of the 1870s to 1910 era, where you had this incredible innovation period, science was flourishing around the world. All of this industrialization, and literally the head of the patent office in the United States in 1905 said, "We're closing the patent office. There are no more inventions to be had." It's a true story. In 1890, they this is before the first car shows, before the first car exhibitions. The Oxford scholars had to sign a sealed envelope for 100 years of how they see London in 1990. This is in 1890. They were so full of themselves, thinking that the humanity has reached this pinnacle, that they said London in 100 years will be inhabitable. The horses' manure will create so much disease that people will choose to live elsewhere. They couldn't realize that 5 years later, a third grader who never finished school would come up with the T model, and with mass production lines, etc. So what I'm trying to get at is that they, like us, thought they were like the best, and they can do anything, no consequence to anything that they do. They're demigods. That's what you see with Bill Gates and with Greta, with all these people. They come up with theories as if they're a god. They social engineer. It's the stupidest and most reckless thing to do. And in 1910, when we started deglobalization, you had the creation of the Fed 3 years later. You had the worst American president in human history, Woodrow Wilson, who literally told the Japanese that they're inferior people. And 30 years later, those inferior people sought vengeance on this. And I tell you this because Biden and Blinken and Sullivan are insulting other countries, other cultures. And you saw the Chinese were this close to a hot war. That's why Xi came to San Francisco. They were this close to a hot war with the United States. And you had World War I, then you had the Great Depression and the rise of Nazism, fascism, and ultimately World War II. Deglobalization is very reckless and very dangerous, very violent. And I think that you have to realize, if we don't save this from happening, it's going to be very troubling, and that's why we're at this point. It's happening right now. It's the next 6-7 months here will decide the next 40, 50 years. It's very unique. It's almost surreal to be talking about it, because you as an average person, you have little weight on what's going to happen, little to no weight, and you just don't know. You just don't know. So it's all going to be decided by some random folks at some random swing state at a random county, who are going to vote either red or blue. It's like 1.5 million swing voters that are going to decide the fate of the rest of us.
Fascinating thoughts there. Always love chatting with you, Lior. You mentioned Greta, you mentioned Bill Gates. George Soros is somebody else who's been doing a lot of social engineering. I know that at Wealth Research Group you have a report about him. Why don't you talk to us about that and about Wealth Research Group in general, where people can find that, what it is you do there?
First of all, thank you for the platform. Wealth Research Group is a free financial newsletter. What we do there is we publish Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, just like I compiled my thoughts into this interview format, which is 30 or 40 minutes. I try to do that 3 times a week in a written form, in 5-minute reads. They go from the macro, the big macro, like we talked about. This could be BRICS or Federal Reserve or inflation, and these could be breaking news, and their importance. And it's also personal things, just things from my own life. I'm an investor. I've been an investor since I was 16. I'll be 40 very shortly. So I talk about my portfolio. Actually, if you want to download my portfolio, just do it. wealthresearchgroup.com/portfolio. If you want to check out my rant about George Soros and the Open Society and why his son is meeting with Kamala Harris 40 times this year, download that from wealthresearchgroup.com/Soros. And actually, if you subscribe to Wealth Research Group, the next 2 weeks, are gonna we're dropping a 7-part series on George Soros and on just this world that we live in, where people are just they're Jesse, they're just saying things and thinking that's reality. It's one of the most fanatical things we've ever seen. This drastic progressivism that's turned into woke, to woke. They care not about objective reality. There is no truth. There is to them, whatever they say is the truth, and then they go and cancel objective reality. It's almost mental insanity to a degree. You're looking at objective reality, and you're thinking, no, that's not objective. It's what I think is reality, and this is just what other people think. If this is a wall, it's because we've come to believe it's a wall, but I can say it's not a wall. It's insanity, and unfortunately, it's spreading to entire cities and cultures, and it's breaking apart families, the family tradition of parents and children. I spoke to a person in New Jersey who's a teacher who told me that if a child tells him that he feels like he's in the wrong body and all that crap that Americans believe in, that the teacher cannot confide in the parent. He cannot tell the parent that his kid is going through something that in most other society will be called insane. So it's craziness, and that's why I say, when you talked about the decline of the West, that is the decline of the West, because Western civilization, if you just maintain that from generation to generation, if you told your children, guys, this is not to be taken for granted. What we have here is at the expense of a lot of difficult decisions, and a lot of past generations have given up their lives so you can live like this. And explain to people about America. Most Americans, they don't even know the 50 states, not let alone like other countries, and it's very troubling. And like I said, wherever the Americans are going out, wherever that vacuum is created, the other forces in the world will come in, and we've seen humans through history. Other forces are not don't have the vision of the founding fathers and the original vision of what the free world should be.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. As I said, Lior, I'm going to put a link to wealthresearchgroup.com as well as the report on George Soros. I definitely recommend people subscribe. It's a great read. You truly hold nothing back, which I greatly appreciate. And thank you once again for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with the audience.
Thank you, Jesse.
And thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, this episode was sponsored by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.